It's really good to be with you guys here. I'm very grateful that I was asked to come and speak with you. I was supposed to come bearing gifts. I have some holy cards, but they're in the van, and my wife and children took off with the van down towards the lake. So maybe I'll get into you afterwards. But the holy cards have that prayer of abandonment on there, and I like to spread that. And so before I get into my talk, I just want to say that one of the most important things that I'll tell you today is, if you haven't been introduced to the abandonment to divine providence, please look into what that means, because really in all my studies of spirituality, it comes down to that, abandoning our wills to the will of God, right? Just like Job said, should we not, if we accept the good from God, should we not also accept that which befalls us? Okay, so it's all about understanding that God is leading us on this beautiful journey of life with its ups and downs, but that He's always present and that He's always there in every moment. We just have to find Him. You know, there's this beautiful thing. You ask yourself the question, where can I find Christ? Where can I encounter Christ? The only place I can encounter Christ is in the present moment, where we are right now, right? Now, that takes place sometimes in front of the Blessed Sacrament, His presence, body, blood, soul, and divinity. But He's also present in every moment of our lives, and we should realize that. Okay, anyway, there's my, my speech about divine providence, and I hope it's worth hearing. Okay, so the talk that I've been asked to be presented today is called A Crisis of Beauty. All right, let me make sure my time is good. We're at 1:10 right now. I'll try not to go too long. I only have 6 pages of notes, so we'll see what happens. It's going to be different than the Theology of the Body seminar. We're not, I do have some quotes from JP2, but we're going to move, I think, a little bit quicker than that. So what I want to do then, the crisis of beauty is pretty widespread, but I want to talk about a few points that will help us get into that and understand where there's a crisis of beauty in our world. And so that's the first part. The second part I'm going to offer, though, is the source of the remedy, how we overcome this, or try to overcome this, at least in our own minds, and then moving to society afterwards. And then I'm going to offer after that a particular reflection on the family and the crisis in the family, because it is also a crisis of beauty. This is also, I like to promote good works. Beauty, what it is and why it matters. It's a very easy read by Dr. Mark Miravalle. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. My wife had this book, and I was like, well, hey, I'm talking about beauty. I should read some of it. It's actually pretty good, right? It's pretty good. And we do have, where he speaks of in here, part of the crisis, right? And so there is this renewal of beauty that is going through the church, right? To be honest, we hit kind of a rough patch in the 70s, where the crisis of beauty became real, even in the church. There are 3 ways in which we have a crisis. Not only 3 ways, like I said, but there are 3 ways. One of them is that beauty is ignored. Another one is that beauty is perverted. Another one is that beauty is misunderstood. When we ignore beauty, most of the time in this world, we are seeking productivity over contemplation. I'm going to talk about contemplation later, but productivity can, in some ways, be a roadblock to contemplation. Because we have this problem with utilitarianism, where things are simply made to use, and in most instances throw away. If you've ever shopped at Walmart, right? They have nice looking things, but they're made to last a few years only. I have to tell this story. my wife and I were in need of pots and pans. And we got a little money for Christmas or before Christmas, and we said, you know what, we got to buy pots and pans. So I'm at Walmart, obviously, because where else are you going to go when you're in our particular state of life? 5 children and 1 income, right? You go to Walmart, that's right. But I bought these pots and pans, and one reason why I wanted them is because it had a lifetime warranty. They're about $20 more than some of them. But I said, a lifetime warranty, that's great. Well, I get them home and I'm saying, let's sign up for the warranty. So I go online, I sign up for the warranty. The lifetime warranty is 5 years. The lifetime warranty of 5 years. Right? And if I was as kind of loud about these things as I used to be, I would have called the company and asked for our money back, but that's a whole bunch of issues that I didn't want to deal with. But it's a throwaway culture. Things are not made to last. Money becomes an object, right? And it's hard to make things beautiful because they're expensive. And when they're expensive, not a lot of people buy them. So the society at large has this crisis where we're seeking productivity and convenience over the sake of beauty. I have a little bit of, and it's hard to kind of put this in perspective as regards to church architecture and sort of the way in which it used to be made, the downfall in the 70s, and but we're rising back. There's a lot of beautiful places being done. But St. Peter's Basilica took 150 years to build. The Cathedral in Milan actually took centuries, but they were doing it little by little. That, you might say, well, that was back then. They didn't have all the construction equipment that we have now. True, that's part of it. But that's not all of it, because people took their time to make things really beautiful. So I did an example that's more modern. St. Patrick's Cathedral. Has anybody ever been to St. Patrick's Cathedral? Yeah, it's beautiful. Right? I used to go there. I used to work with some Salesians up there, kind of in Port Chester, near it. But I used to go there twice a week because I didn't want to confess to the priest that I live with all the time, right? But I, you know what I'm saying, right? So I went there, and it was beautiful. Well, it took 21 years to build. Okay, so they still took their time, and it's a beautiful church. Because artists need time to make something beautiful. I'm so grateful that we have all these beautiful images around here to help our minds, especially when we're zoning out. It's better to zone out on a good image than it is a wall. So thank you, Dan, for bringing these. But to put it in perspective of productivity, the Empire State Building, has anybody ever been there? It took 1 year and 45 days to build. That's it. Now, it has some sense of beauty, but the goal was to have record-breaking construction. The goal was to have the tallest building. The goal was to do it in as little as the time as possible. And while it has some particular beauty, it's much lesser than we would say of St. Patrick's Cathedral or the St. Peter's Basilica. Another way in which we have a crisis is, well, I mentioned the box stores, but also if you think of food, even. Fast food. The culture is so hung up on doing things quickly, right? And one thing that you have to understand is that as human beings, and this is an analogy, this is why fast food works for this, human beings is we're rational animals, right? The only animal that can dine, right? Human beings don't just eat, we dine, right? So how often do we take the time to sit there and enjoy a meal? A meal can be beautiful, right? How often do we want to just get to the next thing? That we just stuff something down that's been cookie cutter, for lack of a better term, and been put out there at the lowest price so that we can just consume and move on with our day, going to thing after thing, jumping from one thing to the next without stopping for a moment. So I think the difference between eating and dining helps us to understand how we should pause and take things in. Right? Dining's not just about the food. Actually, if you go to a very fancy restaurant, it's very little about the food as it is about the presentation. I could go on and on about how you go there and then you have to go to McDonald's afterwards because the meals are so small. I took my wife out for a dinner one time. It was beautiful. Now I will say the presentation and all those kind of things were beautiful, but I walked out of there with a very high price tag and I was still hungry. So, we went to Racetrack. It was right across the street to kind of fill our things. So we did dine. And it was a great time, but then we went and ate afterwards. But anyway, I hope that kind of helps us to, as an analogy, understand the difference between doing things quickly and stopping, because we're going to get into contemplation later in this talk. But another way, as I said, that beauty is in crisis, is in perversion. We pervert beauty. Right? Society at large has a crisis in moral goodness. And that's most prevalent when we look at lust and pornography. But I'm not just talking about the guy who's sitting in the basement closed off from everybody else, who's looking at women in a reductive way. I'm talking about everywhere. Pornography is everywhere. Right? It doesn't have to be nudes. We are seriously degrading the beauty of the human body, because it's become now a product for use. One of the most crazy things about this that I saw, I watched basketball a lot, and there was this commercial on there that was obviously geared towards men who watch basketball, although I found it particularly disgusting. There was a woman half-dressed on a sports car eating a very large hamburger, and it was for Carl Jr. or something like that. And this is the way we're selling things, right? What a degradation of beauty that is. Because the human person, and I want to talk about that as a remedy, right? The human person, the human body, is one of God's greatest creations. It's meant to be beautiful, right? But when we take the human body and make it an object, it's a perversion of beauty. It becomes an object of lust, right? Another way that beauty is in crisis is that we misunderstand it. We think beauty is simply a matter of preference. Well, I think that this is beautiful and you think that that is beautiful, and we disagree on what we think is beautiful, right? Beauty has an objective element, right? Beauty has some real content where one can look on something and say, this is beautiful. There is a story that comes out of modern art that I find particularly interesting. I don't know, throughout the years, I don't know when I first heard about this, but it's been in my mind for years. But it was in my research a turning point for modern art. Now, this was back in 1917. I'm not making any correlations, but a couple months after this happened, Our Lady of Fatima appeared. So, I don't know if this is the reason, but I'm just saying, there was great turmoil in the world. A man named Marcel Duchamp, maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong, but it doesn't matter, it's famously submitted a sculpture. So there was this art museum who was looking for pieces of art, and they said, well, we'll basically take any art, back in 1917. So this guy here had a nice piece of artwork, and it was labeled The Fountain. It was a sculpture of a urinal. Now, actually, there's debate on whether it was a sculpture or an actual urinal. But he signed it. The art museum thankfully rejected it. But it became something that people honored. There were many replicas made of this. And of it, it was said that he's done a great service because he's changed the way that we look at art. The concept is praised, whether he was joking or not. The concept is praised that one has now taken something that you might not think is art and made it art. That was a turning point in beautiful things. And art became, after that, not all the way. So there's still beautiful art out there. And that's not what I'm saying. Sorry. That's not what I'm saying, right? Yeah, I'm still going through puberty. I'm 38. I'll get there someday. Anyway, I have to say on this that we must then, at some point, stop the train and say beauty is not simply in the eye of the beholder. It is, right? Beauty has a particular aspect of it that is very much related to the subject that sees it, right? There's a relationship between something that is beautiful and somebody who admires something as beautiful. There's obviously a relationship. But things must be objectively beautiful if we want to give them that. Another way in which we have a crisis of beauty is not simply in artwork, it's not simply in productivity, but is in the need for constant amusement. Man, nowadays, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it might be, we're just looking for that thing that's going to pop to us. I'm guilty of it as well. Oh, I just want to hear some news that shocks me, right? Not shocks me in a sense, but something that, I'm like, whoa, wow, that's weird, that's funny, that's cool. But then it's just like, boom, flash, you're gone. Boom, flash, you're gone. Much of this is superficial. So one of the crises that we have is that beauty is seen as something superficial. We want the wow factor, which is not in itself bad, but when one doesn't go deeper, one continuously needs to be more wow. And this can be dangerous in some areas of life, right? Beauty has a surprising element to it. And that's one thing that our nature is made for, to be surprised by beauty. But when this notion of surprise turns into a notion of just needing to be shocked or out of the ordinary, that desire was made for something beautiful. But in its perversion, man seeks to be shocked. Like the picture of the urinal, sculpture, the sculpture of the urinal. Let me not do it injustice. It wasn't a picture. It was a sculpture. Right? People have made like bronze ones now to honor this. Anyways, sorry. Look it up or don't look it up. You're going to waste your time, guys. I already told you about it. But one instance of this, and this is true in my own life. I don't know if any of you guys remember Blockbuster Video, but I was there before. Yeah, I was there before Netflix came out. Or not, what was it? Redbox. Redbox was the beginning of the end for Blockbuster Video, right? And then Netflix came along, and I don't even know why. I see people now with like going to get the Redbox, and I'm like, why do you go to get the Redbox, right? You could just get everything from your living room. Well, maybe I'm ignorant, but we moved from Florida to Georgia in June, and I haven't even put up our DVD player yet. We had one, right? But somebody gave me a DVD to watch, and I was like, I don't even have a place to watch this, right? So anyway, but Blockbuster Video, I went through this craze. Well, I went through a number of different ones. This was when I was pre-conversion. I had a conversion. I had a really big conversion around the year 2006, 2007. Before then, I was in darkness. Right? I was in darkness. And so I understand that this aspect of my being, which is meant to be surprised, which is ultimately meant to lead me to something true and good, was just looking for shock factor. I got into gangster movies. And see, this is where Blockbuster Video kind of helped out, because there was just sections, right? There's, okay, this is this kind of section, this is this kind of section. But where I got really dark was in the horror movie section. So I went on and I'm not saying horror movies are inherently evil, but I went on this kick where I started watching one after the other. And they were enjoyable not because they were beautiful. They were enjoyable because my entire being was shocked by them. But it led me to a place of darkness, serious darkness. Because in order for me to get that same high from a horror movie, I had to keep going deeper and deeper into something sicker, right? Something, until I got to one, which I'm not going to mention, and I said, this is enough. This is enough. So we have to be careful what we're searching for, what we're looking for. We have to ask ourselves a question. Is this beautiful? Is what I'm doing beautiful? Because we were meant for beauty, and beauty is meant for us. So if we were meant for beauty, we have to pursue it. That means we have to look through all the junk, and we have to say, this is not beautiful. This sculpture of the urinal is doing nothing for me. So where can I find that which does something for me? So we have to figure out what beauty is. And I'm going to bring in some Aquinas, right? For those of you who don't know Thomas Aquinas, he's very intellectual, but nonetheless, this is funny, I'm a Thomist. What that means is I'm a theologian who follows the works of St. Thomas. I used to very much, I don't want to say hate, but I very much disliked reading Thomas Aquinas because it was so dry to me, right? But one time in my master's program, I wrote a paper on Thomas Aquinas and the Eucharist. And that was when I realized that Thomas Aquinas, his writings are beautiful because of the way in which he can bring forth a reality, right? And so I say that to say, if you pick him up and try to read him and you say, this is terrible stuff because it's so dry, keep going, right? Keep going. But he says of beauty, he doesn't mention it too many times, but he says of beauty that it has three conditions. And this is the remedy, right? Okay, so we're beginning to see that we have this crisis, and then we have to look for the remedy. He says beauty includes three conditions: integrity or perfection, since those things which are impaired are by that very fact ugly; due proportion or harmony; and lastly, brightness or clarity, whence things are called beautiful, have a bright color. So we have something that is beautiful has to have a certain level of perfection, proportion, and clarity or brightness or splendor. We see this in creation. For instance, when we see a flower that is beautiful in full blossom. That flower is flowering all it can flower. Right? It's being the flowerist that it can be. And it's something very beautiful. Not just because of its color, but because of its own perfection. That's what it was made for. So when we're seeking beauty, we have to say, what was this made for? Is it fulfilling its purpose? In the same token, one might call a flower ugly that is diseased. We live in a world that confuses the word is, with ought, or divorces, the word is from ought. It says, just because a thing is, that's how it should be. No, things were created in a particular order. So things not only are, they ought to be something. So if I take my orchid to an orchid doctor, and I say, what's wrong with my orchid? He's going to tell me, or should tell me, well, it's got this kind of a disease, and that's why it looks ugly to you. He's not going to say, well, it is. Just let it be. Right? It's beautiful in its own way. I mean, we say that sometimes, and I'm not, it's like the from Peanuts, the little Christmas tree they get, right? It's beautiful in its own way. We had one of those one year. Not like that. It wasn't like that. But anyways. Have you guys gotten rid of your Christmas trees yet? Good, because we're still in the Christmas season. Yeah. My wife gets kind of... We sometimes do the up until February 2nd, right, which is the old calendar. But sometimes my wife, she can't decide whether she wants to be old or new calendar because she gets tired of the Christmas tree after a little while. So sometimes it's in between there. But nonetheless, we're still in the Christmas season. Merry Christmas. But the flower, right, that's one example. Proportion. Symmetry is beautiful, right? I'm a big symmetry person. We can see symmetry, the beauty of symmetry in, say, a butterfly. Right? Butterfly that has two wings that are matching and they're full symmetry. That's something beautiful. Mathematics, believe it or not, can be beautiful. I used to be a math guy. I was a land surveyor working with engineers for 8 years before I converted. So it's very funny. I used to be a math guy. If anybody had ever told you that I would be right here right now with a degree in theology, they would have, back then, they would have told you that you're absolutely nuts. So you never know what God is doing in your heart. Follow your heart. But the equations of a shape can be beautiful. The nautilus. Does anybody know what the nautilus is? The creature that has within itself all these perfections of angles and the circles. I mean, it's just beautiful. Now, don't look up the urinal, but look up the nautilus. Right? That is something in creation that is beautiful by way of its, we could say, mathematical order, right? Because that's how we perceive it. We also see beauty in complementary relations. The complementary relation between man and woman, ladies and gentlemen, is beautiful, right? If you just look at all of my failings, you can see my wife's splendor, right? She makes up for those in how beautiful she is, how wonderful she is, and how complementary we are. Now, I have my own strengths, but I tell you right now, man and woman is a beautiful thing, right? We also have, that's right, I was going to bring that up. The colors of red and green, right? It's Christmas. They go good together. They look good together, right? I got some cupcakes for Christmas that had red and green on the top. They were beautiful. But different things go like that. So we have this, then, perfection and proportion. Clarity or splendor. Think about the stars, right? Think about how you look up at the stars and they have this certain beauty because they are light. And if you think about it too, I mean, if you want to, you can believe in aliens. The church isn't against that. Dr. Paul Thigpen actually has a book coming out on that. But let's say they don't exist, for the sake of my argument here. Can you imagine that God made the splendor of the stars, all the billions and billions and billions and billions and trillions and zillions of stars, for you? That when you look at those stars at night, that was made for you. Right? Made for humanity, but made individually for you. When God was making the stars, whatever star you might look upon, He knew you were going to look upon it. At that very moment, you're looking upon it. And He made them for you. So not only in beautiful lights, which I tried to plug in these lights and it didn't work. I thought it'd be kind of cool to have Christmas lights. But Elaine couldn't figure it out. Right, so he was too busy liturgical dancing, so we don't have the splendor of the Christmas lights. But light can also be the light of the intellect. Okay, the light of the mind. When something clicks, something astounds us, something surprises us, in a good way, not in shock. We've made the distinction. It can be beautiful. Right? Think about when you get something for the first time. Like, oh, wow, that was it. It can be beautiful. It's the light of the mind. It can happen. Right? Aquinas says that when he says that the beauty pleases when it's seen, he's not only talking about with the eyes, right? Or with the hearing in regards to music, but it's also in our understanding. Right? So beauty has that. So beauty has to have then the integrity, the proportion, and the clarity. So those are some things that you can ask yourself. Is this beautiful? Does this have this? And if it doesn't, what am I doing? Right? Like the Caravaggio. It's beautiful. Thomas, the Doubter, right? That's a beautiful work of art. Why is it beautiful? Because it leads me. Sorry, I'm making everybody turn around. That's what I'm looking at. Maybe I should turn this way. We're going to talk about the beauty of the crucifixion in a minute. But it's beautiful because it leads me to something deeper, right? I'm not just like, oh wow, cool. No, I'm really drawn in, and if I know the story of what's going on, I'm drawn in even deeper. So there's a depth to that piece of art that I can't find in the urinal. There is a depth. Okay? And so the expression of beauty is something that jumps out of us, it grabs us, it draws us in. That grabbed me. That drew me in. Right? It comes out from what is beautiful. A professor of mine used to use, and I wasn't going to bring up this example, but it's kind of funny, so I'll do it. He used to say that beauty, the expression of beauty is like toothpaste being squirted out from a tube of toothpaste. That was they always did, but it's true. My example is like water from a sponge. That which is in comes forth from the thing which is beautiful. It jumps out at you. It's not simply stuck there within the object, the thing. Right? It's something that grabs you. And in fact, it is that expression of beauty that draws us in to what is good and what is beautiful. In the case of the Caravaggio, it draws me in to the story of Thomas the Apostle putting his fingers in the side of Christ. That's something good and something beautiful. Thanks, Dan, for bringing these beautiful works of art. Right? It's something good and something beautiful. But the remedy is not simply knowing these points and going up to a modern art gallery and saying, well, this doesn't have proportion and clarity, or we need to take this away and give something that's there. No, that's not the answer. The answer is the most beautiful expression of God in creation, which is Jesus Christ. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The image of the invisible God became visible in Jesus Christ. There's a quote, and I'm going to use two quotes that I got from Dan, from the letters, John Paul II's letter to the artist. I think they're really great. So this is the passage. God became man in Jesus Christ, who thus becomes the central point of reference for an understanding of the enigma of human existence. I love how GPT writes, The created world and God himself. This prime epiphany, which is God's showing, if you look at the etymology of the word epiphany, it's a God's showing. Yes?
The quote is printed in Appendix D.
Oh, look at that. See? My shortcomings, because I didn't put it in the outline or anything, are made up by those who are around me. That's great. So where is it? Appendix B?
D is in Delta.
D is in Delta. Right. Cool. All right, great. So anyways, this prime epiphany of God who is mystery is both an encouragement and a challenge to Christians. Also at the level of artistic creativity. See JP2. Let's bring Jesus Christ into a contemplation on artwork. Because we have to. The only way that we're going to overcome a crisis of beauty is Jesus Christ. From it is the incarnation, the beauty of God who is mystery, comes flowering of beauty which has drawn its sap precisely from the mystery of the Incarnation. In becoming man, the Son of God has introduced into human history all the evangelical wealth of the true and the good. And with this, he has also unveiled a new dimension of beauty, of which the gospel is filled to the brim. I didn't say anything sincere, did I? She's talking to me. So, Jesus Christ comes to us in his incarnation in the beauty of a baby in all its vulnerability. He comes in the incarnation as the beauty of the Messiah coming to his people. He comes in the beauty of the Blessed Virgin. 10 minutes? Okay, thank you. In his public ministry, his preaching gives the wisdom. In his miracles, shows his divine nature. And in his crucifixion, now you can the right one. In his crucifixion, we also find a depth of beauty that one might not see if they were just a passerby. Imagine being a passerby of the crucifixion. One might not look and say, look at this beautiful man being crucified on a cross. Look how beautiful it is that he's got nails in his hands. Look how beautiful it is that he's bloodied and beaten. One theologian, Von Balthasar, says that this is the most beautiful thing in all of creation that has ever happened or will happen. But why? Because of its depth. Because of what he is doing. And the expression of it is utterly beautiful. Because it is at that moment that salvation is won. And so looking at this, we see divine love, which shows you that beauty is something more than just its surface level. The Eucharist is another instance where Christ comes to us under the appearance of bread and wine. And there's a depth there that leads us past what we can see, touch, and smell. Now, this is profoundly different than artwork or anything else. But it leads us to understand that beauty must have depth. In order for something to be outwardly beautiful, it must have depth. Christ shows us this. All beauty is a participation in God. All that is true and good is also beautiful. Sometimes we have to work our senses up to where we see something good. I used to have this professor who was so contemplative in everything that he did. I used to say this: Dr. Reardon is such high in a point of divine union that he could go in a state of ecstasy over a slug. Not that he did. He never did that. But that was my own singing, because he would stop in the middle of class and jump to a window. We had these huge grasshoppers that were like locusts in Florida, right? He would just say, look at the beauty and the perfection of this animal. Why? Because he understood that God's creation is utterly beautiful because it expresses attributes of a divine creator. Order, wisdom, right? If you're ever into numerology, and I'm not going to go into it because I don't have time, but see me afterwards if you want me to prove to you that every tree and every bush has a number. That every insect has a number. Right? That all is beautiful in that sense. So behind the expression of true beauty is a depth that goes to the very essence of things. God created all things, so beauty finds its origin in Him. Think about the flower. Beautiful flowers are participation in God. Now think about humanity. We are made in the image of God. We have a spiritual nature that knows and loves of almost an infinite depth. Do we superficially see human beings for an object of use? Not in like just lustful manners, but what about the person at the coffee shop? Just give me my coffee. I'm ready to go. Instead of asking them, hey, how you doing? Looking into their eyes. There was a scientific study that said if human beings look into each other's eyes for 10 minutes, they go into a state of almost drug-induced ecstasy, right? Or something like that. I can't remember the exact words. But it's because, if that's true or not, I don't know. I haven't really stared in anybody's eyes for 10 minutes except for my wife's, right? And I could say that is a profoundly awesome experience. But you guys small groups afterwards, so. But I will never comprehend my wife. Never. How much more then will I never comprehend God? So when we find this beauty that's expressed in creation, it's a sea of unending joy. So that's how we counter the crisis of beauty. We go back to the interior depth of what beauty should be. And we can say that is beautiful because it gives me depth. Because it leads me to God, ultimately. So the crisis of beauty is a crisis where we have to lead people to God through images, through what is expressed. Think about the difference between St. Patrick's Cathedral and whatever church you want to imagine in your mind that looks like a gym. Well, besides St. Francis de Sales, who actually is celebrating in a gym right now, but that's not by choice, right? They would much rather have something more beautiful. But something that was actually constructed that might look like a gym. Beauty in images is made to lead us to God. So the remedy of the crisis is that, to make sure that we're leading and being led to God. And that's how beauty leads to contemplation. Beauty captures us and leads us deeper in to what is true, what is good, what is beautiful. Let me just end with this quote. I was going to go to the family in crisis, but next time we have a TOB seminar, I have to show up. Haha, see, there you go, cliffhanger. Wow, but we are having Gaudium et Spes seminar coming up. And not just simply because of that, but because it's such a wonderful text. I wanted to end with Gaudium et Spes 22. And this is about Christ. This is about Christ. The truth is that only the mystery of the incarnate Word does the mystery of man take light. For Adam, the first man, was a figure of him who was to come, namely Christ the Lord. Christ, the final Adam, by the revelation of the mystery of the Father and his love, fully reveals man to himself and makes his supreme calling clear. Let me say that again. Christ, the final Adam, by the revelation of the mystery of the Father and his love, fully reveals man to himself and makes his supreme calling clear. It is not surprising, then, that in him all the aforementioned truths, we could go for the aforementioned truth of this talk as well, find their root and attain their crown in Christ. You are the most beautiful because you're made in the image of God. Christ became man, sanctified human nature. That's where it begins. In our own expression of the fact that Christ has revealed us to ourselves, that we were made for the divine. If you begin to transform yourself and express yourself as you are as a child of God, that's where we begin to heal the crisis. And recognizing others as well in that manner. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. The time is up. I did that, look, 43 minutes. Are you impressed? I didn't finish all those 6 pages, but...
it's a cliffhanger for later.
Yeah. Are there any questions you guys want to raise? Or... No? Okay, great. Enjoy the rest of your retreat. So good to meet those of you who haven't met. So good to see those of you who I've seen already in the past. And I am going to try to find my wife and get those holy cards to give to you, so so that I can fulfill my desire of coming bearing gifts. All right. So, anyways, thanks. Bye, everybody.